We should use nuclear energy way more. Many countries, my native country, Czech Republic, is a good example of this, have a huge usage of fossil fuels in order to make electricity. That should not be the case. Nuclear energy is way more efficient, more clean, and better for the environment. Some people are afraid of the radiation, toxic waste, and nuclear disasters, which is understandable, because there were certain events, but all this can be prevented. Reactors are very well isolated, so there's no need to be afraid that the area around power plants is going to be radioactive. The toxic waste is well isolated as well, and there's not really that much of it. If you compare it to fossil fuels, the CO2 created by burning is way higher than the nuclear waste. Humanity should use this power source way more and inform people that it's not as dangerous as it might seem. Nuclear energy is one of the safest forms of energy available. All major accidents were either human error or explainable failures that could be prevented. It's a shame most people don't actually understand it and won't learn about it. Edit, to further on the last statement. Chernobyl occurred because improperly trained staff attempted to shut down the reactor in an unstable state. This can be prevented with proper training and an active safety culture, which is much more prevalent today. 3 Mile Island was the result of a failure of the relief valve, which was stuck open, but the computers showed the operators the valve was closed. The operators also believed that the core had enough water to cool it and began pulling off the water, when in reality the core didn't have enough coolant, leading to its overheating and subsequent partial meltdown. Fukushima was built in the 1960s when data said that the distance from the coast would be substantial enough to protect them from tsunamis. With modern data and more caution, power plants can be safely planted further inland away from the coastline. The dumb thing is nuke plants are shutting down, ours just did. Thank the fossil fuel industry for our lack of nuclear power. The public outcry against nuclear power plants in the 70s and 80s was socially engineered to keep up profits. So happy when I see pro-nuclear posts, it's the best solution to the environmental crisis that we have. I'm a huge supporter of nuclear energy. Everyone wants to waste money on wind and solar, but clean and safe nuclear had been around for decades. You know who funded all the campaigns in the US against nuclear? The fossil fuel industry. Greenpeace ruined it. Make nuclear plants that use thorium salts, I think we have a winner. Thank you hippies /s. Nuclear is the future. Agree, live in CZBTW. This is one of those stealth unpopular opinions. People don't really think about it that much, but in many corners of the environmental movement it's just kind of a given that you're against nuclear power. Of course nothing is risk-free, and we all saw Fukushima. Nevertheless, I think it must be obvious to everyone that the certainty of global warming and sea level rise is going to do far more damage to humanity, the global economy, biodiversity etc. than 100 Fukushimas ever could. I really don't understand why this is so controversial. Nuclear power, wind power, solar power, hydropower, and thermal power is the best way to go. I completely agree, but on the stipulation that it needs to be a placeholder for renewables until the technology advances to the point of being able to be dependent on those. Nuclear waste is also a problem, and we have to be smart about how we deal with that. It's often not as simple as go nuclear, but being more reliant on nuclear energy is generally a good idea. France too, right? It's sad that when anyone talks about nuclear energy they look back to Chernobyl. More nuclear energy and less nuclear bombs, I say. I agree entirely. However, the biggest issue is cost. Nuclear plants cost far more to construct, 6 times the cost of a natural gas plant, if my memory serves, and must operate far longer before they turn a profit. Furthermore, nuclear construction projects are notorious for going over budget and behind schedule. All these, combined with increased calls for regulation, means few countries can justify the cost of development, and few companies will be willing to invest in them. This is honestly the biggest hurdle to nuclear, far more than safety or environmental concerns. Also should have added how countries should invest in thorium and not uranium reactors because thorium produces heaps less toxic waste and is even safer. Why don't we just use the fucking sun? It's literally just sitting there. While nuclear energy is safer than fossil fuels, it still suffers from one of the same problems as fossil fuels. There is a limited amount of the fuel on Earth. When it is gone, it's gone for good. At our current rate of usage, we have about 230 years worth of fuel left. Nuclear energy is not the future. Renewable energy is. It's also cheaper and safer. With current battery tech, it is also as reliable as fossil fuels as well. Mr. Burns would agree. I think it's the way forward, both fission and fusion when it becomes stable enough and is deemed safe. Waste produced would be the biggest factor, but, as you said, it's isolated. Another advantage would be that the fuel used in fusion aren't used for too much in everyday life, so the consumption rate probably isn't as bad as oil. I don't know the actual amounts of fuel used in oil or nuclear power plants though. I disagree, but this actually is really popular here on Reddit. Why is it a bad idea? Because we, people, are really bad at consistently doing things responsibly in a consistent way over a long period of time. We tend to get sloppy. That's why really nasty nuclear accidents happen every 3 or 4 decades. It started with the accident at the Mayak facility in the Soviet Union, and it will unfortunately not end with Fukushima. I have, however, really high hopes for nuclear fusion. If you get sloppy there, you just extinguish the reactor. Also, you hardly produce any waste. Can someone explain to me why hydrogen power is never considered in these arguments? From what I've heard, it sounds pretty amazing. This is scientifically correct but politically infeasible because nuclear is a scary word and oil companies are essentially a world power. Basically, companies just pay off politicians wherever this gets brought up. All I know is that we can't usually trust America with complex things that need upkeep. Japan couldn't do it, then I have zero faith here either. No. It's expensive and dangerous. Cheap energy technology should be exportable and usable by poorer countries in order to counter climate change. Poorer countries can't afford these technologies. We also shouldn't want every country on Earth have nuclear power and the means to weaponize. Wind, solar, hydro are better technologies and continue to improve and get cheaper. Nuclear is often used as a silver bullet solution but wouldn't be realistic for most of the world.